Several years ago, my wife Carrie and I, we had an opportunity to attend a live production of Les Miserables, or in the English language, we just call it Les Mis, because we don't know how to pronounce French words. And Les Mis is one of the most just amazing stories that has really ever been recorded. I mean, it's an amazing story Victor Hugo wrote. And it's then turned into various productions. Some of them are musicals. I don't watch those. But there's also just live stage productions that are plays. And so I got to go to this live production of a play of Les Mis. It was amazing. And but don't get too excited because it wasn't on Broadway. And it wasn't even in London. It was actually a high school production in Plano, Texas. And it was still great. Because when you have a story that's that powerful, it almost doesn't matter how you do it if you just pay attention. And if you don't know the story, I'm going to share a little bit of the beginning with you because it's my favorite part. I'm going to spoil this for you, but then if you've never seen it, you're going to want to go and see the rest of it. But at the beginning of the story, you're introduced to Jean Valjean. And Jean Valjean is a convict. He's been released from prison, and he's living on the streets. He has nowhere to go and nobody to care for him. And a priest comes, and he takes Jean Valjean into his home. And he cares for him. He's loving towards him. But Jean Valjean, he's a man with a past and a history. And those habits die hard. And so he sees the silver that is all around the priest's home, and in a moment he takes it and he tries to flee and to become a rich man. But the police catch him and they bring him to the priest and they say, "This man, he claims that you gave him the silver." And the priest looks at him and he says, "Jean Valjean, I am very disappointed with you, because you forgot the candlesticks." There's a great story of C.S. Lewis where he is drawn into a conversation with some colleagues. And they're debating, what is it that is unique to the Christian faith? Because if you've studied other religions and religions of the ancient Near East and even others, you'll see that there's different facets of Christianity that has some overlap. There's different commonalities that you find. And so these colleagues of Lewis were sitting around saying, well, what is it? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? What is it that makes Christianity unique? And they called Lewis in. And they said, what is it that is unique about Christianity? And immediately he replied without hesitation, that's simple. It's grace. Right now we're in a series called Spiritual Reality Check. Because we live in a time where there are so many different competing ideas and narratives and stories about the world and about God and about our faith and who we are and who we were created to be. And so we need to be grounded in the reality that's been revealed to us by God, the reality and the truth of who God is and who we are. And so a couple of weeks ago, we started with the reality that God exists. And if God exists, then your life has meaning and purpose. And no matter what you are going through in your life right now, understand that God wins in the end. There is hope for you, because God exists. And at the same time, last week we saw that even though God does exist, there's something deeply wrong with our world. The world is not how it is supposed to be, but it's not just the world, it's us as well. There's something about us that is not how it should be. And we saw that there was a brokenness that is deep within all of us, and that God is the only one who can restore us to the health that we were created for. But this week I want to look at grace. And grace is kind of a churchy word. It's a word that we use a lot in this building. We use it in our songs, but it's not a word that you hear in the world a whole lot, which is a shame. You know, we hear about people who are maybe being gracious, but we don't really always even think about what that means. And we hear people talk of being graceful, which can have a completely different meaning. But the idea of grace is actually one of the most important concepts that there is. And the word is one of the most important words in the human language. Because grace has to do with not repaying evil with evil, but repaying evil with good. You see, grace lies at the very heart of our faith. It is the heartbeat of Christianity. That our God, who saw us after he creates this good world, and he sees us, and he sees that the mess that we have made of our own lives. He sees the hurt that we've inflicted upon other people, the mess that we have made of the world that he made good, but instead of punishing us, as he had every right to do, instead he sends Jesus, who comes and he takes all the punishment that we deserve upon himself. Instead of repaying us evil with evil, instead he repays us with good. See, that's grace. But I have to tell you that if grace is the very heartbeat of our faith, then one of my fears is that in the church, our hearts are in need of defibrillation. Because we can talk a lot about grace, especially in this context, and we can sing all kinds of songs about grace. And maybe we have a theological understanding of grace, and we can teach our kids about grace, but then we tend to tell them to be good. In fact, we're pretty good at being good, aren't we? I think some of us were really good at being good. And it's good to be good, in some sense. You know, we pay our taxes, and we don't cheat. We do the right thing. We treat people with respect. We do our jobs, and we provide for our families, and we wear the right clothes, and we watch the right kind of movies, and we play the right kind of games, and we do all the good things. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that you should be bad. Okay, so don't leave here thinking, well, Lucas said that we should be bad. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you can become really good at being good, and at some point you start to feel really good about how good you are. And when you feel good about how good you can be, then grace no longer matters. See, the Bible has a word for people who are really good at being good. They're called Pharisees. And see, when we become really good at being good and we start to feel how good we are, especially compared to those other people who are not as good at being good as we are, then grace for us becomes ho-hum, and it becomes forgettable, and it becomes tame. And the reality check that we need is that God's grace is wild. God's grace is provocative. It seems outlandish at times. It's scandalous. And in fact, if God's grace doesn't at times make you feel a little squeamish, a little uncomfortable, if it doesn't push against our moralism and against the self-righteousness that wells up and resides in the depths of all of our hearts, then I'm not sure we really understand God's grace all that well. And so this morning, I want to look at a story that should make us uncomfortable. It's a story that does not allow us to rest easy in our attempts, our stale and worn out pursuits of being good, but instead leaves us only with grace. And so in Luke chapter 7, we see this about Jesus. There's a story from his life. In verse 36, it says, "Now one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And when a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume. And as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. And then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them." Have you ever been to a party where things got really awkward? You ever been at a dinner and somebody who wasn't expected shows up and everybody just sort of stops and thinks, what are they doing here? You know, or maybe you're sitting at a dinner table and everything seems really normal, and then somebody says that one thing that everybody else knows you should never say, but they say it and it gets really uncomfortable and quiet. I've been to parties like that. I've been to dinners like that. But I can tell you, I've never been to a party that looked like this. I mean, here they are having dinner and this woman comes in. And you can just picture that she's standing there, and here's Jesus. He's kind of reclined, because that's how they used to lay down next to tables. Wouldn't that be great? We didn't have to sit and eat. It's so much work. I'd rather just recline and just eat like this. But Jesus is reclining, and she's standing there. And she begins to weep and cry, and the tears fall down on his feet. And then she kneels down, and with her long hair, she begins to wipe his feet. And then she brings perfume out and begins to massage his feet. See, that's getting uncomfortable right there. I mean, can you imagine if you're sitting there? Like, that's getting uncomfortable for everybody. I promise you, if you come to my house, we have a set guest list, and there's no foot massages on the menu. I know some of you are disappointed. You were really hoping that was going to happen. It's not going to happen, sorry. Now understand that in Jesus' day, dinners did look a little bit different. They're not exactly the way that we do dinners now. For one, they were public. Some of these dinners were very public. You notice that she heard that Jesus was going to be eating at the Pharisee's house. See, this is a big deal. This is Jesus. He's kind of famous right now. He's kind of the rage. All these people are following him, and he's going to be going to the Pharisee's house for dinner. And so word begins to spread, and people show up. And it's not an indoor event. It's actually an outdoor event, and people were free to mingle around and walk around. Even if you weren't on the guest list, you could wander up and listen. You want to listen in. And wouldn't you want to hear what Jesus had to say to these Pharisees and vice versa? That's a conversation you would love to listen in on, right? And so all these people, word begins to spread. You can just imagine this crowd coming in. They want to hear Jesus and the Pharisees, and this one woman, she's there. That's not that unusual. What's unusual, what's weird is everything that happens after. This whole scene that she has, everything that she does. See, that's awkward. That's uncomfortable for everybody involved except for Jesus. I mean, Jesus, this guy, he doesn't even try to stop her. I mean, it's like he has no sense of common decency. You know, I mean, Jesus, do you have any sense of propriety? of decorum. Like this is not how we behave. Jesus, think of the children. What do the children see with you letting this woman massage your feet with this oil? It's terrible. It's scandalous. But Jesus lets her do so. Have you ever thought about the people that are attracted to you? I'm not talking about physical attraction. Some of you are very beautiful people. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure you're very attractive. But I'm talking about the people that gravitate towards you and you towards them. You just have this natural affinity, you know? Those people that you just get around and you just have something in common, something draws you to one another. And typically what you see is that people, they're attracted to people like them. It's kind of the whole birds of a feather flock together. And so successful people, they just find each other. I don't know how they do it. Successful people, they congregate and they're really successful together. And beautiful people, they find each other really beautiful together. And then there's the rest of us. I have so many bald friends. It's amazing. It's not like I try, but I just have so many bald friends. We just find each other. But see, isn't it interesting that Jesus, who is God, he attracts people who are profoundly ungodly. He attracts people who are profoundly unreligious. These are the people that you would think would have the most to fear by God. These are the people you would think would run away from God, but they can't get enough of Jesus. These are the prostitutes and the tax collectors and the rejects and the outcasts and the sinners. And they can't get enough of Jesus, while the Pharisees, who are the self-declared servants of God, the godly people, the right people, the religious people, they can't stand Jesus, and they really can't stand the people who love him. See, I think this is part of their problem with Jesus, is that they look at everybody who's following after Jesus, and they're like, wait a minute. You can't be anybody godly or religious or someone we should listen to, because just look at the riffraff following after you. See, for the Pharisees, Jesus is an enigma. I mean, here's a man who has a growing reputation. People are talking about Jesus all the time. Is he a prophet? He claims to be from God. Like, what does this mean? Plus all the miracles. And so they're hearing this and they're going, okay, who is this guy Jesus? He claims to be from God, but then look at the people who are attracted to him. See, that doesn't make sense. If God cannot tolerate sin, how can this Jesus person tolerate sinners? See, that makes no sense to them. And so what they decide, what they conclude is that Jesus must not be who he says he is. He can't be from God. How could he possibly be from God? Look at this woman who comes and loves him. See, that's exactly what the Pharisee who's hosting this whole party, he says. He sees this whole scene playing out. And look what he says in verse 39. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. See, if Jesus was who he claimed to be, he would not put up with this. He would not allow this kind of a scene to be going on. If Jesus only knew, the thing is, Jesus knows, and by the way, he knows what Simon's thinking too, this Pharisee. And so he's going to answer him. I love this. Verse 40, Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Did you catch that? Simon is thinking to himself. He says to himself, if this man were a prophet, and then Jesus answers him. Don't you hate it when God reads your mind? You know, you're just having this private conversation. God, I'm just thinking bad thoughts about these other people, and then God moves in, and he's like, yeah, I was listening to that. And you're like, this was my thoughts. So he's just talking to himself. If Jesus only knew, and then Jesus answers him. It's so annoying. It's so awkward. I love that. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, which, by the way, is a huge amount of money. It's like almost 2 years' wages. And the other 50, which is not a small amount, but it's nothing like 500. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he canceled the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? And Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled. I love that he has to pause for a moment. I suppose. You can just see the wheels in his head turning. It's like there's something about this that he can't quite make sense of. I guess if I have to answer this question, I suppose it's the one who had the bigger debt canceled. You've judged correctly, Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house, and you did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who has been forgiven little loves little. He says, Simon, see, here's the problem. This woman, she knows what her debt is. She knows the weight of her sin. She sees it all too clearly, and therefore her love, because she's been forgiven, this grace that she sees, her love is breathtaking. But Simon, your sin, you think it's 50 denarii worth. You think it's small. You think it's insignificant, and therefore your love is small and insignificant. One time, Carrie and I were out having dinner with some friends. And at the time, I think we had maybe one of our 4 kids. And this couple, they didn't have any kids. And somewhere along the line, we're just talking, and they're talking about maybe they were going to have kids someday. And we're talking about, all that goes into having kids. And somehow it got back to just having kids, like literally, like birth. And so this guy we're sitting there with, he stops the conversation all of a sudden, just very abruptly. He says, I have a question. And he turns to Carrie and he says, okay, childbirth, how painful is it really? I got to tell you, I don't know why you asked that question. There's nothing good that is going to come out of asking that question. I have no idea why he's asking this question, but he stops everything. I got a question for you. How painful is it really? And Carrie, I got to tell you, she's pretty tough, okay? So she's had 4 kids. That's all we're having, by the way, but she's had 4, and all 4 are natural births, no medication. I'm not telling you that's how you should do it. I would be absolutely drugged up, okay? I'm just saying that's what she did. That was her choice. No drugs, natural births, 4 times. So she's tough, okay? I call her the Wolverine. She is small but fierce, all right? And she looks at him, and she says, worst pain of my life. And here's what he says. I'm not making this up. He looks at her kind of sideways, and he goes, really? At this point, I start backing up. I'm just waiting for the Wolverine to rip his throat out and show it to him. I mean, and his wife, bless her heart, is so great. I'm looking at her face, and she has this mixture of horror and if you don't kill him, I will. I mean, it was just priceless. But have you ever had one of those friends who just minimizes everything you do? It's like whatever accomplishment you have, somehow they find a way to make it seem like, it's not that great. Like, that's the guy who after David kills Goliath, he's the guy going, I mean, that's great and all, but I mean, how hard could it have been? It only took you 1 stone. See, we don't like to think about our sin. We don't like to dwell on our sin. We don't like to really wrestle with our sin. I mean, that makes us uncomfortable. It's not fun to do that. And then we begin to minimize our sin, and then we focus on being really good at being good so we don't have to think about the ways that we're not really good, and we begin to minimize and gloss over our sin. But can I tell you, when we do that, we're essentially telling Jesus, how hard was it really to save me? I mean, I know he had to die for those people, but me, I mean, it probably wasn't really that hard, was it, Jesus? See, when we minimize our sin and we become really good at being good, actually what that reveals is just how deep the sin has hold on our hearts. See, sometimes we need to feel the weight of our sin. We need to be honest with ourselves, to look in the mirror, say, this is what is within me. This is the brokenness within me. This is what I have done. This is what I have said, not so that we will be paralyzed by it. Hear me, it's not so that we'll be paralyzed by it, not so that we'll be crushed by it. It's actually just the opposite. It's only when we feel the weight of the sin upon us that then we can bask in the magnificence of the grace of God. See, it's only when we stop glossing over our sin and minimizing our sin that then we can revel in the radical, scandalous grace of God. It's only when we feel the weight of our sin upon us that God's grace truly becomes amazing to us. See, this woman pouring oil on Jesus' feet, her tears falling down, kissing his feet, making a scene. This is a picture of someone who is reveling in the radical, scandalous grace of God. And all of it, it's scandalous. The whole scene, this woman, the oil, her tears, all of it in the middle of a dinner party, it's scandalous. It's a scandalous grace, but understand that the most scandalous thing that happens that night is not what she does. And the most scandalous person at this dinner is not her. No, that's actually Jesus. Jesus is the most scandalous person at this whole dinner party. Because not only does he allow her to make this whole scene, but look at what he says next. In verse 48, then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. Now that's scandalous. That just blows the lid off this whole thing. Your sins are forgiven. And the other guests begin to say among themselves, wait a minute. Who is this who even forgives sins? See, only God can do that. Only God can forgive sins. Like, who does he think he is that he would forgive sins? And then verse 50, Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Like, this is God stuff. It is scandalous that Jesus would have the audacity to speak for God. But not only that, but how would he have the audacity to claim that God would forgive someone like her? I mean, does he know who she is? Does he know her reputation? Does he know what she's done? How dare Jesus say that her sins are forgiven? See, that's scandalous. How could he say that? How could he say, you're forgiven, you're saved? So let's back up for a moment. Go back, verse 42. Remember when Jesus asked Simon the question? I love this. He asked, which of the two men will love the money lender more? And Simon replied, I suppose. You ever wonder why he has to hesitate for a moment? You know, he's sitting there. I mean, this is a bright guy. He's a Pharisee. Like, this is basic math. Like, any 4-year-old can answer this question. 500 versus 50, which one is more? Like, why is he theorizing? Why is he struggling with this? What is it that he can't seem to make sense of in his mind? I'll tell you. There's something wrong with this story, the way that Jesus tells it. And what's wrong specifically is the moneylender. See, we don't see this as readily because we borrow money from institutions. Maybe your bookie, but we need to talk later if that's going on, okay? So it's a whole other conversation. But in terms of most of us, right, it's our mortgage companies, it's school loans, it's the credit card companies, right? These are impersonal institutions that they just exist out there. But see, this is a money lender. They didn't have those institutions. This is very personal. See, this is his reputation that's on the line. This is what he does. This is his livelihood. This is how he puts food on the table. He loans out money and he collects it back with interest. This is how he provides for his kids. This is how he pays for his wife's spa days. This is how he pays for golf at the country club. This is how he pays for his kids' college tuition, right? This is everything to him. And it's all based on his reputation that moneylenders never forgive their debts ever. Ever. And so for Simon, he got caught up way back when Jesus says, and this moneylender forgives the debt. And Simon's like, wait a minute, whoa, hold on. Your story makes no sense to me. This is a moneylender who forgives debts. That is nonsensical. That never exists. What kind of a moneylender would forgive a debt? And Jesus says, I am. I'm exactly that kind of a moneylender. I'm a moneylender who doesn't just forgive the debts, I'll actually pay the debt for you. See, some of you're asking the same question that those dinner guests were asking, sitting around. But you're not asking about for somebody else. You're asking for you, how could God forgive me? Does he know what I've done? Does he know the things I've said? Does he know what I know that lies deep within my soul? Does he know the mess that I've made in my life and other people? Does he know all that? How could God possibly forgive me? And Jesus says, I am the moneylender, and I don't just forgive your debt, I will pay it for you. See, the truth is, I am Jean Valjean. And I have robbed God of his glory and tried to get away with it. And I have given my heart to so many idols over the years. And I have lied to cover up my sin, and I have hurt people who've cared for me, and I have hated my enemies. I've committed adultery in my heart, and I've tried to gloss over my sin, and I've tried to minimize my sin. But when I was faced with the charges, when I was face to face with my sin in the presence of God, Jesus looked at me and he said, Lucas, I am so disappointed in you because you forgot the candlesticks. See, some of you're trying to live your life without grace. And it is a losing battle. You're trying to live your life without grace, to be good enough, to become really good at being good, but you will never be good enough to solve your own sin. And you can try to live in denial, you can try to forget the past, and some of you are trapped in the past with regrets that you've carried around with you, and what God wants you to know is that you don't have to live in your past. You don't have to be crushed by the regrets. You can receive grace. He has grace for you that you are not loved and accepted because you are good. You are loved and accepted because you cannot out-sin the grace of God. It's never been done. And this is the grace that God wants you to have. And it's the grace that he wants us to give away. See, the world doesn't need more good people. Can I be honest with you? There's literally like billions of good people all over this planet. All over, in their own cultures, in their own homes, their own societies, their own neighborhoods, and all the rest. They are good people. They are doing all the basic goodness things that good people do. But if we want to make a difference in the world, if we want to be truly relevant to the world, then the answer isn't to give people a better list of rules to live by. And to say, hey, get your act together. When you start living up to our standards, then we will accept you. See, being good is not good enough. If the answer is not to give people more rules and to say, hey, shape up or ship out, and then we'll love you. Well, the answer is to show them grace that blows their minds and melts their hearts. I think some of us, we're so afraid of being misunderstood. We're afraid that people will get the wrong idea if we're too loving towards those people. If we're too kind towards those people. But can I tell you something? If we love the way Jesus loved, if we show grace the way Jesus showed grace, if we forgive the way Jesus forgave, then you will be misunderstood. And the people who will be the first to misunderstand you, I got to tell you, they're the people who become really good at being good. And they're the people who probably talk really loudly about God and about being good, but they know nothing of God's grace. And they will reject you, and they will whisper about you behind your back, and they will say, man, I don't know what that guy's gotten into. He's off the rocker, right? He has lost his mind. I don't know what he's doing, associating and being with those people over there. But can I tell you that when you do that, and you make them super uncomfortable, that in that moment, you look like Jesus. There's one more step, one more reality check that we need. And this is where it gets real. Because all that sounds really great in theory. We want to look like Jesus. Yeah, can I tell you what it looks like in your life this week? Is it means you have to give grace to the people that have hurt you the most. See, this is for some of us, this is the hardest step of faith you'll ever take. To know that Jesus, just as he has forgiven us, and he has paid us back, not evil for evil, but he repaid evil with good, that we need to go and we need to extend that same grace to other people, and it feels impossible. And listen, I get it. This is a daily battle I have because I know what it is to be betrayed. I know what it is to have people that I trusted hurt me and my family. I know what that's like, just like you do. It is a daily battle. It is not easy. It feels impossible. But I tell you two realities that we need to live in that make this possible. The first is this, that you are forgiven. To know the weight of your own sin and to wrestle with that, not to be crushed by it, but then to see it and then to bask in the greatness of God's grace. Like that's where it begins. You have to see and to know deep in your soul that you are forgiven, but then you have to see that they are too. You have to see that Jesus died so that they could be forgiven. If Jesus gave his life so that they could be forgiven, how dare we withhold from them what Jesus gave his life to give? See, this is who we are as believers, as followers of Jesus, to follow him, to be defined not by our regrets and by our bitterness, to be defined not by our political affiliation or our principles or our morals or our values or our football team or our clothing or our socioeconomic status or where we live or the schools we go to or the career we have. That's not what defines us. To follow Jesus, we have to be defined as people who are wholly and helplessly dependent upon grace. That's who we are. And it all begins with Jesus. And if you want to know that kind of grace in your life, to allow Jesus to begin the work that he wants to do, to release you from regret and from bitterness, and to lead you into the life that you were created for, then you can start right now by giving your life to him. And some of you, maybe you're thinking, look, I've known Jesus for years. Here's the thing about giving your life to Jesus. We just keep taking it back. Have you ever noticed that? I keep holding things back. Some things I pretend that I've given to him and I haven't. Like this is one of those moments where we can stop and we say, God, I'm holding on to these regrets. I'm holding on to this bitterness. I'm holding on to parts of me that I don't want you to see, but you know. I have these private conversations, but they're not private. You know all of it. So God, I want to give you my life again, all of me. And if you want to know that kind of grace in your life, to begin to experience the life-changing power of God's grace in you, you can start right now to choose to give your life to Jesus. Just bow with me for just a moment. I want to pray for us. Jesus, you gave your life for us all those years ago. And sometimes we just take it for granted because we hear about this all the time. We come every Sunday, and yet throughout the week we forget. And it's just so much easier to focus on being good than to recognize that the only thing that will truly transform us, it's not being good, it's your grace. It's your grace that changes us from the inside out so that you change our character, you change who we are, you heal our hearts. And then, yes, we will go and we will do good in the world, but it's not out of ourselves, it's out of you. It's your power within us. And so, Lord, if there's anyone here right now and maybe they've never given their life to you, they've been holding on, and there's a part of them that knows that there is a brokenness, there is something deep within them that is just not how it's supposed to be, that this is that moment, Lord. Give them the courage to say, Jesus, I give you my life. I want to step into a new kind of life, a new kind of reality where you are at the center, where I will follow you. Lord, if there's anyone like that, I pray they would just have the courage to pray that prayer. Jesus, I give you my life, and then to come and to talk to one of us, to say, this is the decision that I made. Lord, for others of us, maybe we've been walking in this life for a long time, but God, I just know the thing about sacrifices, living sacrifices, we keep crawling off the altar. God, help us to crawl back up again, to give our lives to you fully, to surrender ourselves to you, so that you continue the work that you've begun within us, to recreate us and to make us into the people that we were always meant to be. God, and then help us to step into this world and to extend a grace that is scandalous, that is breathtaking, that feels so foreign to the world that we live in, that is so harsh and judgmental, that ridicules faith, that stands against you. And yet, God, this is a world that you love, and Jesus, a world that you died for. Help us to step into this world, not to condemn, but as you came to save. To say, you need to know Jesus. He loves you more than you can imagine. God, help us to forgive those who've hurt us. Give us the strength to move with grace into the world and to reveal to the world your love, your grace that is radical and overwhelming and outlandish and scandalous. Lord, help us to be your people this week. Amen.